Standing in my father's mahogany-paneled office, I placed the power of attorney documents and house keys on his desk with steady hands. 4 years of sleepless nights, canceled dreams, and sacrificed relationships had led to this moment. My sister Lisa smirked from the leather chair beside him, her manicured nails drumming the armrest. She had been back exactly 9 weeks. Dad pushed the $87 million inheritance papers toward her, his signature still wet. I smiled calmly and said, "Congrats, Lisa." Then I handed him my letter. His face went from triumph to ash white in 3 seconds. 4 years earlier, I was a different person living a different life. At 32 years old, I had finally assembled all the pieces of the future I'd been working toward since college. My architecture firm in Chicago had just promoted me to junior partner, complete with a corner office on the 43rd floor and a salary that made my student loans look manageable for the first time. My girlfriend Amanda, a pediatric nurse with a laugh that could light up entire hospital wings, had been wearing my engagement ring for 5 years. We'd picked out wedding invitations and booked a venue overlooking Lake Michigan for 8 months away. Everything was falling into place with the precision of a blueprint I'd spent a decade drafting. Then Martha called at 2 in the morning. Martha had been Dad's housekeeper for 20 years, a sturdy woman with silver hair and the kind of steady voice that never rose in panic. But that night, her words tumbled out broken and frightened. Dad had collapsed in his Lake Forest estate. Massive stroke, right side paralyzed. The doctors weren't sure if he'd ever walk again, and his speech was garbled and confused. They said he needed round-the-clock care, intensive rehabilitation, and someone to immediately take control of his business affairs, or everything he'd built would crumble. I caught the first flight out, leaving Amanda asleep with a hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter. When I walked into that hospital room and saw my father, the man who'd always stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and commanded every room he entered, reduced to a frail figure tangled in tubes and monitors, something inside me shifted. His eyes found mine, and even through the confusion and fear clouding them, I saw recognition. I saw need. The doctor pulled me into the hallway and laid out the reality with clinical precision. Dad's company, Premier Development Group, managed commercial real estate projects worth approximately $90 million across 3 states. Without someone stepping in immediately, contracts would default, projects would stall, and everything would collapse like a house of cards. Dad needed physical therapy 5 days a week, help with basic activities like eating and bathing, medication management, and constant monitoring. The cognitive impairment meant he couldn't make business decisions or manage his own affairs. I tried calling Lisa 17 times over the next 2 days. My younger sister had been traveling through Southeast Asia for 2 years, documenting her adventures on Instagram with perfectly filtered photos of temples and beaches. She finally answered on the 18th call, her voice bright and carefree against a background of waves and laughter. "Lyle, what's up, big brother? Dad had a stroke. He's paralyzed on his right side. He needs us." Silence stretched across the Pacific. Then, "Oh wow, that's heavy. Is he going to be okay?" "I don't know. The doctors say he needs family support, someone to help coordinate care and manage his business. Can you come home?" "I'm in Bali right now. I'm in the middle of this really important spiritual retreat. I'm finally finding myself, you know? I can't just drop everything and deal with heavy stuff." Deal with heavy stuff. Our father, lying helpless in a hospital bed, was heavy stuff. "When can you come back?" "Soon. I promise. Just not right now. You've always been better at this kind of thing anyway. You're so responsible and organized. Dad needs someone like you." She promised to check in regularly. She didn't. I told Amanda I needed to postpone the wedding and move to Lake Forest temporarily. She sat on our apartment couch, holding my hands, her brown eyes searching my face. "How long?" "Maybe 6 months. Just until Dad stabilizes, and we can find professional care that works." She nodded slowly, understanding but worried. 6 months. We can do 6 months. I took a leave of absence from the firm. They said they'd hold my position for 3 months, maybe 4 at most. I packed 2 suitcases and moved into my childhood bedroom in Dad's sprawling estate, surrounded by trophies from high school baseball and posters I'd never bothered to take down. The reality was harder than anything the doctors had warned me about. Dad couldn't dress himself, couldn't cut his own food, couldn't manage the stairs to his bedroom. I learned to help him through physical therapy sessions, where he'd grunt in frustration at his uncooperative limbs. I memorized medication schedules, coordinated with nurses and therapists, battled insurance companies over coverage denials. And during the hours Dad spent in therapy or resting, I dove into the deep end of Premier Development Group's operations. I took a leave of absence from the firm. They said they'd hold my position for 3 months, maybe 4 at most. I packed 2 suitcases and moved into my childhood bedroom in Dad's sprawling estate, surrounded by trophies from high school baseball and posters I'd never bothered to take down. Amanda visited every weekend, driving up from Chicago with home-cooked meals and updates about our friends' lives. But after 3 months, the strain started showing in her tight smiles, and the way she'd go quiet when I talked about Dad's progress or the latest business crisis. My leave of absence expired, and the firm called with their regrets. They couldn't hold the position any longer. They'd promoted someone else to junior partner. That same week, Amanda sat me down at Dad's kitchen table, with tears already spilling down her cheeks. She'd been offered her dream position, director of pediatric nursing at Seattle Children's Hospital. 5 years she'd been working toward this opportunity. 5 years of night shifts and extra certifications, and going above and beyond for every patient. I need to know if you're coming back to Chicago, or if this is indefinite. I looked out the window at the grounds where Martha was helping Dad practice walking with his cane. He'd made progress, but he was nowhere near independent. The business was finally stable under my management, but pulling away now would undo all that work. I can't leave yet. Amanda closed her eyes. I love you. I have loved you for 7 years, but I can't put my life on hold forever, waiting for someday. She slid the engagement ring off her finger and placed it between us on the table, the small diamond catching the afternoon light. I'm sorry. I hope someday you can forgive me. I watched her walk out the door, drive away, take my future with her. And then I went to check on Dad's medication schedule, because that was what the day required. I lost my career and my fiancée in the same week. And I was completely alone, with a burden I couldn't put down and couldn't carry much longer. 2 years transformed me in ways I couldn't have predicted. I was no longer an architect who happened to be helping his father. I'd become the CEO of Premier Development Group in everything but title, a crash course graduate of the School of Trial by Fire. The terrified son fumbling through medical jargon and business contracts had evolved into someone who could negotiate million-dollar deals in the morning and adjust Dad's physical therapy routine in the afternoon. Premier Development Group didn't just survive under my management, it thrived. I discovered I had an instinct for commercial real estate that surprised everyone, including myself. I could see potential in properties others dismissed, could structure deals that satisfied all parties, could manage the complex dance of contractors, investors, and city regulations. We closed 3 major projects that first year, then 5 the next. Dad's company wasn't just stable, it was growing, but the personal cost kept mounting in ways that hollowed me out from the inside. My Chicago friends stopped calling after I canceled the 10th plan in a row. My phone became a graveyard of unanswered messages and declined invitations. Dating was impossible. Who wants to build a relationship with a man whose life revolves around caring for his disabled father and running a business he didn't choose? I watched my former colleagues progress through their careers via LinkedIn updates. Promotions, awards, speaking engagements, new firms started. Meanwhile, I ate dinner with Dad every night at 6:30, helped him with his exercises, and fell into bed exhausted around midnight. I saw Amanda's Facebook announcement about her engagement to a Seattle cardiologist and felt nothing but a distant ache, like phantom pain from a limb lost long ago. The strangest part was that despite everything, I didn't regret being there. Dad and I developed a relationship we'd never had when I was growing up. He'd always been distant, focused on building his empire, measuring success in square footage and profit margins. But vulnerability stripped away his armor. We watched Cubs games together, him yelling at the television with his improving speech. We shared meals and conversations that went deeper than business reports and life updates. He thanked me constantly, tears forming in his eyes. "You're a good son, Lyle. A better man than I ever was." Those moments made the sacrifice feel worthwhile, but they couldn't erase the loneliness or the growing resentment toward Lisa, who called twice a year for 5-minute conversations filled with excuses. She was in Paris now, then Rome, then Barcelona. Her Instagram showed a life of freedom and adventure while I was trapped in a routine of medications and meetings. "I wish your sister would visit," Dad said one evening, his voice heavy with sadness. "I must have done something terrible to drive her away." I bit back my response about who was actually there and who chose beaches over family. Dad's estate lawyer, Mr. Hendricks, visited for the annual review during my second year. He was a precise man in his 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a briefcase that probably cost more than my first car. He mentioned that Dad had been asking about updating his will. "Your father wants to acknowledge your sacrifice properly, Lyle." Dad nodded, his speech clearer now after months of therapy. "You've given up everything. I want to be fair." The new will gave me 75% of the estate, with 25% to Lisa. I felt uncomfortable witnessing the signing, insisting I wasn't doing this for money. But Mr. Hendricks was firm. "Your father wants justice, not equality. There's a difference." The business challenges kept coming. Halfway through year 2, I discovered a contractor had been running an embezzlement scheme on our $50 million downtown project. It took 3 months of 20-hour days, forensic accountants, and cooperation with federal investigators to untangle the mess. I managed to save the project and recover most of the funds, and the contractor ended up in federal prison. The local business community took notice. I started getting calls from other firms, asking if I'd consider selling Premier Development Group or coming to work for them. I mentioned it to Dad one evening, testing the waters. His face crumpled in a way that made him look ancient. "This company is my legacy, Lyle. It's all I built. Please don't take it away." So I stayed, turning down opportunities that might have let me start fresh. Late one night, unable to sleep, I wandered into Dad's study looking for a book. I found a box on the top shelf, filled with old family photos and documents. Among them was a letter in Lisa's teenage handwriting, dated 10 years earlier. "Dad, I hate being compared to perfect Lyle. I hate feeling like I'll never be good enough. I hate this house, and the pressure, and the constant disappointment in your eyes. When I'm 18, I'm leaving, and never coming back." Another document caught my eye, a journal entry in Dad's distinct angular handwriting from the same period. I was too hard on Lisa. I pushed her away by always holding up Lyle as the standard she could never meet. I've spent years praising one child while crushing the other. Now I've lost my daughter because I didn't know how to love her the way she needed. The guilt is eating me alive. I sat on the floor of that study until 3 in the morning, holding those papers, understanding for the first time the depth of Dad's wound over Lisa. He hadn't just lost a daughter. He blamed himself for driving her away. All these years, he'd been hoping she'd come home and forgive him. I felt compassion for both of them, and frustration that I was the one paying the price for their broken relationship. But I put the box back on the shelf and said nothing. What good would it do? Dad was already carrying enough guilt. I could carry this knowledge alone. 3.5 years into my unexpected life, as a caregiver and CEO, Dad's health took another downturn. A second stroke, minor compared to the first, but devastating in its implications. His memory became unreliable, Swiss cheese where solid ground used to be. Some days he'd look at me with perfect clarity, tears streaming down his face as he thanked me for everything I'd done. Other days he'd call me by the wrong name, or forget I'd been living there for years. The doctor pulled me aside, after running tests. "Your father may have 1 to 2 years left, Lyle. I'm sorry. Make the time count." I felt the urgency like a physical pressure in my chest. I wanted Dad's remaining time to be good, to be filled with more than just medical appointments and business reports. We started taking drives to places he loved, watching sunsets from the terrace, talking about his own father and childhood. The business could wait. These moments couldn't. Premier Development Group had reached its peak value under my management, worth approximately $90 million, according to the latest assessment. I'd been featured in Chicago Business Journal with a headline that read, "Young CEO Transforms Family Business." Colleagues I'd never met sent connection requests on LinkedIn, asking when I'd start my own firm. After Dad passes, I told them, then I'll figure out my own life. The call from Lisa came out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was bright and cheerful, as if we'd spoken last week instead of 8 months ago. "Lyle, how's everything? How's Dad doing?" I was so stunned I almost dropped my phone. "Where have you been?" "Dad's condition got worse. He had another stroke." I know. I've been thinking about him so much. I saw that article about you online. You're doing amazing things with the company." Something in her tone set off alarms. "Why are you asking about the company?" "Just curious. It sounds like you've really grown the business." "That's wonderful." The conversation ended awkwardly, leaving me with an uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. Martha noticed me staring at my phone in the kitchen. "What's wrong?" Lisa called. First time in months. Started asking about the company. Martha's expression darkened. She'd been with our family long enough to see patterns I was too close to recognize. "I don't trust that girl. She only calls when she wants something. She's just checking in. You've given up everything for your father. Don't let her waltz in at the end and take what you've built." I dismissed her concerns, but they nagged at me over the following weeks. Dad was having more lucid periods, but they were tinged with deep emotion and regret. He'd grab my hand with surprising strength. "I failed, Lisa. I was a terrible father to her." "You did your best, Dad." "No, I didn't. I need to make it right before I die. I need her to know I'm sorry." The intensity of his guilt unnerved me. I tried to reassure him, but he'd shake his head, tears forming. Then Lisa showed up. I answered the door on a Saturday morning to find my sister standing on the porch with designer luggage and a tentative smile. She looked different, polished in a way that spoke of money and careful presentation. Her hair was professionally styled, her clothes were expensive, and she carried herself with new confidence. "Surprise! I've come home." Before I could process my shock, she threw her arms around me. "I know I've been the worst sister. I'm so sorry. I should have been here." Dad's reaction when he saw Lisa walk into the living room was pure joy. His face lit up like I hadn't seen in years, tears streaming as he reached out with shaking hands. My baby girl came home. Lisa spent that first week being the perfect daughter. She sat with Dad for hours, holding his hand and telling stories about her travels. She helped with his physical therapy, encouraging him through exercises with patience I'd rarely seen from her. She cooked elaborate meals, laughed easily, filled the house with warmth and life in a way it hadn't felt in years. Dad was happier than I'd seen him since before the first stroke. The guilt that had been eating him alive seemed to ease. He'd watch Lisa move through the house with such love and gratitude that I felt my suspicions were unfair. Maybe she really had grown up. Maybe travel had matured her. Maybe she genuinely wanted to reconnect with family before it was too late. I let myself believe she'd stay and help shoulder the burden I'd been carrying alone. Then I overheard the phone call. It was the end of her first week home. I'd stepped into the garden for some air, tired from a long day of meetings. Lisa was on the terrace above, her voice drifting down through the evening air. She must have thought she was alone. "Yes, it's working perfectly. The old man is eating out of my hand." Her voice was completely different from the warm, caring tone she'd been using all week. It was cold, calculating, sharp with satisfaction. "Lyle, he's completely clueless. He actually thinks I'm here to help. It's almost sad how trusting he is." My heart started pounding. "I just need to stay 9, maybe 10 weeks total. Just long enough to get him to change the will in my favor. Then I'm gone with everything." She laughed, a sound that made my blood run cold. 4 years of Lyle playing nurse, and I'll walk away with the whole inheritance. It's almost too easy. Once I have the money, I'll never have to see any of them again. I can finally live the life I deserve. I stood frozen in the garden, hidden by shadows, as my sister laid out her entire plan to use our dying father for money. Every smile had been calculated. Every tender moment had been performance. She wasn't here out of love, or growth, or desire to reconnect. She was running a con, and Dad and I were the marks. My first instinct was to confront her immediately, to drag her in front of Dad and expose her. But then I thought about Dad's face, when he'd seen her, the joy that had erased years of pain and guilt. Telling him the truth would crush him. In his fragile state, it might kill him. I decided to watch carefully, gather evidence if needed, and protect Dad from the truth that would break his heart. I had no idea how badly I was underestimating my sister's skill at manipulation. Over the next several weeks, I watched Lisa execute her plan with the precision of a master chess player. Every move was calculated to deepen Dad's emotional dependence on her, while positioning me as the successful son who didn't need anything. She'd bring up old memories at dinner, stories from her childhood that painted her as the overlooked daughter who just wanted Dad's approval. Remember when I tried to show you my art project and you were too busy with Lyle's baseball game? I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but it did. I'm working through those feelings now. Dad would apologize with tears, and Lisa would graciously forgive him, reinforcing the narrative that she was the wounded child finally healing. Then she'd pivot. But Lyle, you've built something amazing. You're so capable and successful. You'll always be fine, no matter what happens. The subtext was clear. Lyle doesn't need help. Lisa does. I caught her going through Dad's financial documents in his study one afternoon. She jumped when I walked in, but recovered smoothly. I'm just trying to understand the family business. I feel like I should know what Dad built. That's confidential company information. We're family, Lyle. Don't be so paranoid. I started noticing her having private conversations with Mr. Hendricks. When he visited, she'd walk him out to his car, talking in low tones. When I asked her about it, she smiled innocently. I'm learning about estate planning. It's interesting stuff. You should be glad I'm taking an interest in family matters. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, but what could I say? She was being helpful and attentive. Dad was happier than he'd been in years. Without hard evidence beyond an overheard phone call, I'd look like the jealous older brother trying to exclude his reformed sister. I tried talking to Dad privately one morning after his physical therapy. Dad, I'm worried about Lisa's sudden return after all these years. His expression shifted from open to defensive. She's your sister. She's finally home. Don't you want our family to be whole again? It's been 4 years. Why now? Right when your health is declining, and the estate is worth the most it's ever been. People change, Lyle. She's matured. She's explained everything. She was lost, and now she's found her way home. Give her a chance. Please. I realized Dad wouldn't hear anything negative about Lisa. The guilt had blinded him completely. Lisa turned up the charm even more. She started attending Dad's doctor appointments, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. She volunteered at the charity Dad had supported for decades, posting photos on social media with captions like, "Finally home with my amazing father," giving back to his favorite causes. Dad's friends and business associates saw these posts and called to tell him how wonderful it was that both his children were by his side now. If I said anything suspicious about Lisa, I'd look petty and cruel. I couldn't let it go. I hired a private investigator, giving him Lisa's information and asking him to dig into her life abroad. 2 weeks later, he delivered a report that confirmed my worst fears. Lisa had been living off a series of wealthy boyfriends across Europe and Asia. Each relationship had ended when the man realized she was using him. Her most recent boyfriend, an Italian financier, had cut her off completely 3 months ago after discovering she'd run up $20,000 on his credit cards. She was broke, deeply in debt. She'd returned home because she'd run out of options and money, and she'd timed it perfectly to coincide with Dad's declining health and the peak value of his estate. I had documentation, bank records, interviews with ex-boyfriends. Proof that Lisa was exactly the manipulator I suspected, but showing it to Dad would break his heart and potentially kill him. His health was so fragile that the stress could trigger another stroke. I decided to wait, to protect Dad quietly, to hope Lisa would leave empty-handed when she realized her plan wouldn't work. I underestimated how far she'd go. 9 weeks after Lisa's return, Mr. Hendricks requested a formal meeting with Dad and both of us children. We gathered in Dad's study, the same mahogany-paneled room where this had all started. My stomach twisted with dread as Mr. Hendricks opened his briefcase. "Your father has asked me to prepare updates to his estate documents." Dad looked at Lisa with such love and pride that I felt sick. "I've made a decision. I've thought about this carefully, and I know it's right." The new will Mr. Hendricks laid out gave everything to Lisa. 100%. The $87 million estate, Premier Development Group, the properties, the investments, all of it. To the sister who'd been back 9 weeks. "Lyle is successful and capable," Dad explained, his voice steady with conviction. "He's built a career and proven he can thrive in business. Lisa needs help starting her life. This is how I make things right for failing her when she was young." I couldn't breathe. 4 years of sacrifice, and I was getting nothing. "Also," Dad continued, "Lyle, you have power of attorney over my affairs. I want Lisa to have that too. I want both my children to share that responsibility. Transfer it to her." Mr. Hendricks looked deeply uncomfortable, but followed Dad's instructions, preparing the legal documents. Lisa put on a perfect performance, her eyes widening with shock. "Dad, I can't accept this. Lyle has done everything. He gave up his whole life for you." But her eyes told a different story. They gleamed with triumph. Dad reached out and took her hand. "This is final. This is what I want." Then he looked at me expectantly. "Lyle, tell me you understand. Tell me you support this." I sat in stunned silence, drowning in betrayal and disbelief. 4 years of my life, my career, my relationship, my youth, all sacrificed. And my father was giving everything to the daughter who'd shown up 9 weeks ago to run a con. "Say you understand, son." I looked at Dad's hopeful face, at Lisa's barely concealed satisfaction, at Mr. Hendricks's miserable expression, and I realized something that changed everything. Dad would never see the truth about Lisa. His guilt had built a wall around his perception that no evidence could penetrate. Fighting this would only make his final days miserable and might actually kill him. But I also realized I couldn't stay and watch this play out. I couldn't be a supporting character in Lisa's heist while she dismantled everything I'd built and dishonored everything I'd sacrificed. In that moment, I decided to leave. Not with anger or bitterness, but with the quiet dignity of someone who'd done the right thing and wouldn't compromise that for any amount of money. I'd walk away, and I'd let Dad face the consequences of his choice. "I understand," I said finally, my voice calm. "I'll take care of the transfers." Dad's face flooded with relief. Lisa's smirk grew wider, and I began planning my exit from the life I'd been living for 4 years. I spent that entire night in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of who I'd been before all this started. My old baseball trophies caught the moonlight. Posters of buildings I'd once dreamed of designing hung on walls I'd stopped seeing years ago. I sat at my old desk and began writing a letter to my father. The words came slowly at first, then faster as 4 years of unspoken pain poured out. I didn't write in anger. I wrote in truth. I thanked him for the relationship we'd built, for the moments of genuine connection that had made the sacrifice feel worthwhile. Then I laid out everything I'd given up. I wrote about Amanda, about watching the woman I'd planned to marry walk away because I'd chosen him over her, about the career I'd built for a decade, destroyed in 3 months because I'd answered his call for help, about the friendships that had withered, the opportunities declined, the life I'd postponed indefinitely. 4 years of my youth, my prime earning years, my chance to build my own family and future. I wrote that I wasn't asking for recognition or money. I didn't need payment for love. But I couldn't stay and watch Lisa manipulate him, while he dismantled everything we'd built together. I couldn't be present for the betrayal that was coming when she got what she wanted and disappeared again. I attached the private investigator's report. Not to hurt him, but so the truth would exist somewhere, documented and undeniable. So that when Lisa eventually showed her true nature, he'd understand what I'd tried to protect him from. My final paragraph took me an hour to write. I loved you enough to give up everything. I hope someday you understand what that meant. I'm leaving the keys and power of attorney. I'm done. But I'll always be your son. And I'll remember the good times we had, the baseball games and dinners and real conversations. Those were worth it. But I can't watch what comes next. As dawn broke, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases. 4 years of life reduced to 2 bags. I wrote a formal resignation letter to the Premier Development Group Board, effective immediately. I prepared all the legal documents to transfer power of attorney to Lisa, signed and notarized. I gathered every key to the estate, every security code, every access credential to the company systems. Dad and Lisa were waiting in his study that morning. They expected me to fight, to contest the will, to make a scene. Instead, I walked in calmly and began placing items on the desk with steady hands. Power of attorney documents, signed over to Lisa. House keys, all 17 of them on the ring Martha had given me when I first moved in. Company access cards and passwords, written on a sheet with instructions. Security codes, alarm information, contact numbers for every staff member and contractor. Lisa was smirking, convinced she'd won completely. Dad looked confused, uncertain. What are you doing, Lyle? Giving you what you want. I met his eyes. Congrats, Lisa. I placed the sealed envelope containing my letter on top of the pile. Everything I couldn't say out loud is in here. Read it when you're ready, Dad. I turned to leave. Wait. Dad's voice stopped me. What's in the letter? Tell me now. It's better if you read it privately. But Dad was already tearing open the envelope with shaking hands. I'd asked him to wait, but he'd never been patient. He unfolded the pages and began reading. I watched his face change. The confusion shifted to shock, then to horror. His skin went pale, then red, then pale again. He read about Amanda leaving, about my career ending, about the 4 years I'd given without complaint. He saw the private investigator's report, the evidence of Lisa's debts and schemes, and the calculated timing of her return. His hands started shaking so badly the pages rattled. You gave up, Amanda? Your partnership? Everything? You needed me. That's what family does. He looked at Lisa, and I saw the moment the spell broke. Is this true? Were you using me? Lisa's mask dropped completely. Her face twisted into something ugly and contemptuous. Oh, please. You were easy. You wanted so badly to believe I loved you, to believe I'd forgiven you. You practically begged me to take advantage. Dad staggered backward like he'd been punched. His face went crimson, veins standing out on his forehead. You can't be serious? He shouted, his voice raw with rage and shame. Then he clutched his chest. I recognized the signs instantly. Another stroke. I lunged forward, catching him as he fell. Call 911. I shouted at Lisa, but she stood frozen, useless in the crisis. I lowered Dad to the floor, checking his pulse, his breathing. Started CPR while screaming at Lisa to call for help. Finally heard her fumbling with her phone. The minutes until the paramedics arrived stretched into hours. I kept compressions steady, breathing for him, begging him to hold on. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and equipment. Dad's hand found mine, gripping with surprising strength. His eyes were open, terrified and apologetic. His lips moved, and I leaned close to hear the whispered words. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Fix this. Then his eyes rolled back, and he lost consciousness. At the hospital, doctors worked for 3 hours before one of them came out to the waiting room where I sat with my head in my hands. Lisa had disappeared within an hour, claiming the stress was too much. He's alive, but barely. Another massive stroke. We've stabilized him for now, but he's on life support. It could be hours or days. I'm sorry. I sat in that waiting room through the night, alone. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. The will was already changed. Everything was legally Lisa's. Dad had transferred power of attorney to her that morning. Even if he survived, even if he wanted to undo what he'd done, Lisa now controlled everything. My honesty, my attempt to show him the truth, had potentially killed him, and I'd still lost everything. Lisa returned the next morning, her expression cold and calculating. You should have kept your mouth shut. Now Dad's dying, and you still get nothing. I'm his power of attorney now. I control everything during probate. Even if that letter holds up in court, I can drag this out for years. Hope it was worth it. I sat alone in that hospital room, watching machines breathe for my father, and wondered if integrity was worth this price. For 3 days I barely left Dad's side. The machines beeped in rhythm with my heartbeat, monitors tracking every breath the ventilator pushed into his lungs. Lisa vanished completely after her cold assessment of the situation. She'd text occasionally. Too stressful. Can't handle hospitals. Martha came on the second day, bringing homemade soup I couldn't eat, and sitting with me in silence. She held my hand while we watched Dad's still face, and her presence was the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. Mr. Hendricks arrived on the third morning, his expression grave. He pulled me into the hallway outside Dad's room. I need you to understand the legal situation, Lyle. The new will your father signed is valid and binding. Lisa is the sole beneficiary. More importantly, she now holds power of attorney. Even if your father wakes up and wants to change things, she can contest it, claim undue influence, diminished capacity. She can tie up the estate in litigation for years. I don't care about the money. I know, but you should understand what you're facing. I went back to Dad's bedside, held his hand, and prayed for the first time in years. Not for inheritance or recognition, just for him to live. For one more chance to talk to him, to tell him none of the money mattered compared to having him here. On the afternoon of the third day, a nurse came rushing in to check monitors that had started beeping differently. She called for the doctor. I stood back, heart in my throat, as they ran tests. Dad's eyes opened. Get his son, the doctor said to the nurse, and I stepped forward. I'm here. Dad's eyes found mine, filled with tears and something that looked like determination. His voice was weak but clear. Hendricks. Now. The doctor started to protest that Dad needed rest, but Dad cut him off with surprising force. Get my lawyer, now. Mr. Hendricks arrived within the hour, briefcase in hand. Dad, propped up on pillows and looking 20 years older than his 68 years, wasted no time. Emergency codicil to my will. I want everything back to Lyle. 100%. Lisa must have been monitoring the situation because she burst into the room at that moment. You can't do this. You promised me everything. You said you wanted to make things right. Dad looked at her with an expression I'd never seen on his face. Pure contempt. I promised a manipulative stranger pretending to be my daughter. My real daughter died years ago, or maybe never existed. Get out of my sight. This is because of Lyle's lies. He poisoned you against me. Everything in that letter was true, wasn't it? Dad's voice was steady despite his weakness. The debts, the boyfriends, the timing. You came home because you needed money, not because you loved me. Lisa's face twisted. So what? You drove me away. You compared me to perfect Lyle my entire childhood. You made me feel worthless. Why shouldn't I take what I can from you? Because that's not love. That's revenge. And I won't enable it. Dad turned to Mr. Hendricks. Draw up the papers. Hospital staff brought in witnesses, 2 doctors and a nurse who'd been caring for Dad. Mr. Hendricks worked quickly, producing an emergency codicil that revoked the previous will and restored everything to me. Dad signed with a shaking hand, while Lisa screamed threats about lawsuits and undue influence. Hospital security escorted her out as she hurled accusations and profanity. The room fell silent, except for the beeping of monitors. But Mr. Hendricks pulled me aside with a worried expression. There's still a problem. She has power of attorney. Your father was too weak to change that this morning. If he doesn't survive long enough to revoke it, she'll control everything during probate. She can make your life hell, tie everything up in courts for years. I went back to Dad's bedside, trying to be grateful he was alive, and not think about the legal nightmare ahead. But exhaustion and stress were catching up with me. I must have fallen asleep in the chair, because Martha woke me with a gentle hand on my shoulder. Your father told me to give you this if things went wrong. She handed me an envelope, yellowed with age. My name in Dad's handwriting, dated 3 years earlier. I opened it with shaking hands. The letter inside was written shortly after Dad first changed his will to favor me, before Lisa ever came home. He wrote about his guilt over Lisa, about how he knew he'd been a terrible father to her, how he'd pushed her away by constantly comparing her to me. But then he wrote something that made tears stream down my face. I know my weakness. I know that if Lisa comes back, I'll want to believe she's changed. I'll want so badly to fix what I broke that I might make terrible decisions. So, I'm writing this now, while I'm clear-headed, to tell you the truth. Real love isn't about guilt or obligation. It's about showing up. You've shown up every single day, Lyle. You've sacrificed everything, and you've never asked for anything in return. That's real love. If I forget that later, if I let guilt blind me to reality, please forgive me. But know this, you are the son I'm proud of. You are my legacy, not because of money, but because of who you are. I see you, I appreciate you, and I love you more than I can express. I pressed that letter to my chest and sobbed. Years of feeling invisible finally acknowledged. The next morning brought a miracle. Dad didn't just stabilize, he improved dramatically. Doctors called it remarkable, saying they'd expected him to decline, but instead he was rallying. By afternoon, he was sitting up, speaking clearly, and demanding action. He had Mr. Hendricks draw up new power of attorney documents, revoking Lisa's authority and restoring it to me permanently. Then he called an emergency meeting of the Premier Development Group board, all of whom came to the hospital. I'm making Lyle the permanent CEO, Dad announced, his voice stronger than I'd heard in days. Not acting CEO, official. And I'm transferring 49% of company shares to him immediately, today. The will handles inheritance after I die, but this happens now, while I'm alive. The board members, who'd worked with me for years, applauded. Several shook my hand, telling me it was long overdue. I was locked in now, regardless of what happened with Lisa or the estate. I had real ownership, real authority, but Dad wasn't done. I'm also filing criminal charges against Lisa for elder fraud and theft. A police detective came to take Dad's statement. He described how Lisa had manipulated him, isolated him from truth, and stolen cash from his safe before trying to flee. They arrested her at the airport with $40,000 in cash she'd taken from the estate. She faced 5 to 10 years for elder abuse, fraud, and theft. Everything shifted in a single day. The daughter who'd schemed to steal everything was in jail. The son who'd walked away with nothing owned half the company and all of his father's respect. Justice came swiftly and completely, like a storm that clears the air. 6 months later, I stood on the terrace of my own place, a downtown loft I'd purchased with my first real CEO salary. Through the windows I could see Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon, the same view I'd once admired from my old architecture firm. Life had come full circle, but I was a different person now. Dad had made a remarkable recovery, defying every doctor's prediction. He lived in the estate with a full-time care team I'd personally vetted and hired. His mobility had improved to the point where he could walk with minimal assistance, and his mind was sharp again. We'd settled into a routine of dinner together 3 times a week, sometimes at his place, sometimes at mine. The relationship we'd built during those 4 years had survived the crisis and emerged stronger. Premier Development Group was thriving. The board had unanimously approved my permanent appointment as CEO, and under my continued leadership, we'd landed several major contracts, including a $50 million affordable housing development with the city. That project meant everything to me. After years of dealing with luxury commercial real estate, I wanted to build something that actually helped working families. Dad attended the groundbreaking ceremony, beaming with pride as he told everyone within earshot, "That's my son. He's not just making money, he's changing lives." Lisa took a plea deal. 3 years in minimum, security prison, restitution of all stolen funds, and mandatory therapy. Dad refused to speak on her behalf at sentencing, a decision that clearly cost him emotionally, but one he stood by. She wrote letters from prison, begging for forgiveness and claiming she'd changed. Dad kept them in a drawer, unread. "Some bridges burned completely," he told me one evening. "I'll always carry guilt about my failures as her father. But I won't let that guilt destroy what I have with you." My personal life was slowly rebuilding. I'd reconnected with some old friends from Chicago, and to my surprise, they understood. Several had aging parents themselves now, and told me they couldn't imagine doing what I'd done. I'd started dating Claire, an attorney who specialized in estate law. We'd met at a professional conference, and she'd listened to my story without judgment, just genuine interest and respect. We'd been together 4 months, taking it slow, learning each other. She understood family complexity in a way Amanda never could have, and I was learning to trust again, to open my heart without fear of losing everything. The Breakthrough Affordable Housing Project was scheduled to break ground in 3 weeks. I'd been working with architects and city planners to create something beautiful and functional, units that families could actually afford without sacrificing quality or dignity. It felt like coming home to my original passion, architecture, but with the business skills and resources to make real impact. One evening, Dad invited me to the estate for dinner. We sat on the terrace, watching the sun set over the grounds, drinking coffee and talking about nothing important. Then he set down his cup and turned to me, with an expression I'd learned meant serious conversation was coming. "I need to tell you something I should have said 4 years ago." "What's that?" I was wrong about everything. About Lisa, about the will, about what fairness means. His voice was steady but heavy with emotion. "I thought making things fair meant equal distribution. Give each child the same amount, and they'll both know they're loved equally. You were trying to fix old mistakes. I was letting guilt blind me to current reality." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "You gave up your entire life for me. Amanda, your career, your friends, your future. You gave up everything, and I almost threw that sacrifice away because I felt guilty about failing a daughter who'd already abandoned me years before. You were sick, vulnerable. Lisa was skilled at manipulation. That's no excuse." Dad's eyes filled with tears. "You deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved immediate recognition, gratitude, and protection from someone like Lisa. Instead, I made you prove your love over and over, while I chased the ghost of a relationship that never really existed." We sat in silence while he collected himself. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of Martha's garden. "Finally," he continued, "I'm sorry for not seeing you clearly sooner. Sorry for almost losing you because I couldn't see past my own guilt. Sorry for making you sacrifice so much just to be heard. I felt 4 years of pain and resentment finally loosening their grip. You were trying to be a good father to both of us. I understand that now. But I ended up being a terrible father to the one who actually showed up." He grabbed my hand. "I hope you can forgive me." "I already have." We embraced, both of us crying, years of complicated emotions finally finding release. When we pulled apart, Dad wiped his eyes and managed a smile. "Mr. Hendricks drew up my final will last week. Ironclad, he promised me. No room for contests or challenges. Dad, you don't have to talk about this." "Yes, I do. The majority goes to you, as it should. There's a substantial portion for your mother's favorite charities, causes she would have loved. And there's a small amount set aside for Lisa, conditional on her completing rehabilitation and genuine therapy." I raised my eyebrows. "You're still leaving her something?" "A small amount, with conditions. She might change someday. People can surprise you. But I won't let hope blind me to reality anymore. If she never changes, the money goes to charity." It was more generous than Lisa deserved, But it was Dad's choice to make. I respected it. Over the following weeks, I found myself reflecting on those 4 years with new perspective. At the time, they'd felt like a prison sentence, my life on hold while everyone else moved forward. But looking back, I could see how they'd shaped me in ways I'd needed. I'd learned business and leadership through trial by fire. I'd developed resilience, patience, and a capacity for sacrifice I didn't know I possessed. I'd built a relationship with my father that most people never get to experience. It was more generous than Lisa deserved, but it was Dad's choice to make. I respected it. Yes, I do. The majority goes to you, as it should. There's a substantial portion for your mother's favorite charities, causes she would have loved. And there's a small amount set aside for Lisa, conditional on her completing rehabilitation and genuine therapy. A small amount, with conditions. She might change someday. People can surprise you. But I won't let hope blind me to reality anymore. If she never changes, the money goes to charity. The 4 years hadn't been wasted. They'd been transformation. Final review, before we break ground. Claire stopped by with lunch, kissing my cheek before setting sandwiches on my desk. Working on a Saturday again? You love this project. My phone rang. Dad's number. I answered with a smile. What's up? I'm making my famous chili tonight. Come for dinner. Martha is making your famous chili, you mean. Semantics. Will you come? Wouldn't miss it. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair, looking around at the office I'd earned, the life I'd rebuilt, the future that was finally mine to shape. And I thought about the lessons those 4 years had taught me. I'd learned that sacrifice without boundaries isn't noble. It's self-destruction. You can give everything, and still not be enough, for people determined not to see you. I'd learned that real love means showing up, yes, but it also means knowing when to walk away. Staying in a situation where you're being used and devalued isn't love, it's enabling. I'd learned you can't make people see truth they're determined to ignore. Dad had needed to hit rock bottom with Lisa, to face the full consequences of his choices before he could see clearly. No amount of evidence or gentle warnings would have penetrated his wall of guilt. But most importantly, I'd learned that doing the right thing doesn't always bring immediate rewards. Sometimes the reward is simply knowing you lived with integrity. Sometimes it's the person you become through the struggle, the character you develop, the strength you didn't know you had. I lost 4 years of my original life plan. But I gained 4 years of becoming someone I could respect. Someone who didn't compromise values for convenience. Someone who showed up when it mattered, even when it cost everything. And in the end, truth surfaces. Justice comes. Not always in the way you expect or on your timeline, but if you stand firm in who you are, if you refuse to let bitterness corrupt you, if you love with wisdom instead of blind obligation, you find yourself exactly where you need to be. The inheritance was never really the point. The money was just money. What mattered was knowing I'd done right by my father when he needed me most. What mattered was building something meaningful with Premier Development Group. What mattered was standing up for myself when the situation became untenable, walking away with dignity when staying would have destroyed me. They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned the full quote. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds we choose, the commitments we honor, the integrity we maintain, those are stronger than any accident of birth. I chose to show up. I chose to sacrifice. I chose to walk away when it was right. And those choices made me who I am today. Not the inheritance, not the title, not the money, the choices, and I'd make them all again. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Martha wants to know if you're bringing Claire to dinner. I smiled and typed back, yes, see you at 6. I closed my laptop, looking out at Chicago stretching beyond my windows. Somewhere out there were people who'd make choices today about family, sacrifice, and integrity. Some would choose wisely. Others wouldn't. But each choice would shape who they'd become. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and headed out. I had dinner with my father, a project that would house hundreds of families, a woman who understood me, and a future I'd built with my own hands through the hardest 4 years of my life. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever sacrificed everything for family, only to feel unseen or unappreciated? How did you handle it? Did you stay, or did you walk away? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences might help someone else facing a similar situation. If this story resonated with you, if you felt the struggle and the triumph, please hit that like button. It tells me these stories matter to you. Subscribe to the channel if you want more real-life stories about family, justice, and finding your way through impossible situations. And share this with someone who needs to hear that doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, is never wasted. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminded you that integrity matters, that showing up matters, and that standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong. Take care of yourselves. And remember, you're worth fighting for, even when the people who should see that are blind to it.